Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about my 5 favorite fall topwater baits. Topwater fishing in the fall is one of the best ways to have some amazing fish catching days. You also have the opportunity of catching a giant bass because anytime you're throwing topwater, they tend to generate bigger strikes than average. But I got to tell you, not all topwater baits excel in the fall. There are definitely some topwater baits that outperform other topwater baits. Just like in the spring and early part of the summer, a lot of the baits I'm going to be talking about here are not going to perform quite as well early in the year. But for fall time period, these 5 topwater baits will catch you some good fish. Does not matter the species of bass that you're after either. Before I do get into that though, I do want to remind you guys that I do a bunch of lake breakdowns with fishthemoment.com. If you're looking for a little bit of help on your lake, we provide 40 waypoints based on the specific season, broken up into a bunch of different patterns to help you really break down those lakes so that you can catch more fish in a timely manner. So check those out. I'll put the link in the video description. Also, if you want to support the channel and you're looking to purchase some tackle like these fall topwater baits, I'll put links in the video description as well. And they're associated with my Tackle Warehouse affiliate program. So if you do make a purchase, a small percentage of the sale will come back to the channel, which I use to create more content so that hopefully we all can learn from each other. All right, so fall topwater is definitely one of the best patterns going. But I want to give you a little bit of reason as to why that is. The first thing that's happening is we're losing a lot of daylight. And because we're losing a lot of daylight, what that means is there's not as much sunlight penetration into the water. And because of that, a lot of the shad species, which generally drop much deeper during the middle part of the day because their food source, phytoplankton, has dropped down deeper, a lot of that plankton stays much higher in the water column. And if they're higher in the water column, the bait fish are higher in the water column. The whole start of the food cycle is higher up, which means a greater percentage of the bass are going to be closer to the surface. And the closer the bass are to the surface, the better a topwater becomes. So that's one thing. Secondly, generally speaking, the late part of the summer into the early fall is when the thermocline will be at its highest place in the water column. So what I mean by that is, generally speaking, if the thermocline's at 25 feet in July, a lot of times it's moved up to 15 feet even potentially by the end of the summer. Your dissolved oxygen levels are changing and the water temperatures are changing, which can lead to a higher thermocline. And again, similar to the bait fish, if the thermocline is higher up, there's less room for those fish to be really living in. So the higher the thermocline is to the surface, the higher the bass and the bait fish are, which again mean that your topwaters are better. The third reason that the topwater is great in the fall is because of those first two things that are happening and your water temperatures are dropping. A lot of your bait fish, does not matter if it's shad or bluegill or panfish, a lot of them are coming to shallower water, which means you have a lot more fish, bass, that are feeding on those bait fish and those panfish. You're going to have a lot more of the entire fishery shallow. And generally speaking, again, if you're talking about fishing the bank, topwater baits are great. The last thing I'll just mention is it does seem like the diet of most bass species tends to change quite a bit from more of your crayfish type species to more of your shad and panfish species as you start getting cooling water temperatures. Some of that has to do with your crayfish are actually starting to go into hibernation when the water temp starts to hit into the 50s. And also because the bass tend to get a much better diet or more calories from eating bigger panfish and shad, and that tends to be more of what they're after as the water temperatures cool, so they can fatten up better for the winter months. And you're much better off using a topwater bait for fish that are keying in on some of these roaming shad or panfish versus, say, a bottom bait that does a better shot at mimicking a crawfish, because if the bass are changing from a crawfish diet to more of a bait fish diet, they're going to be looking for your moving baits. And that is where a topwater bait comes in. So I've got here my 5 favorite go-to fall topwater baits. Now that you've got a little bit of background as to why I like to throw some of these, it might make a little bit more sense as to when I describe why I like to use some of them. So the first one here is this guy. This is a Berkeley cane walker. So this is a big topwater walking, spittering, sputtering type topwater bait. These are made to cast an extremely long distance. You know, they have a very good weight transfer system. They are made to really cast schooling fish. And because of what I just said before, you get a lot more schooling activity during the fall period. So I love to have a big cane walker on the deck that I can cast a quarter mile to schooling fish when I see them. So if I'm fishing on a fishery where I do have a lot of fish that are chasing shad or chasing bait fish that are in your lake, and this does not matter if you live up in Wisconsin or down south, you're going to start to see a lot of fish chasing the bait fish that are in the lake that you're in. The problem with that pattern is if you're using a bait that you can't cast real far, you generally, miss out on a bunch of strikes. So you want a topwater bait that you can cast basically the maximizer cast, that you can cast it to the point where you almost cast your spool out in some instances. And I'm not joking. I mean, 150 feet is a long cast, and you can do it with these baits with the right rod and reel setup. So I definitely like to have a big walking bait that is made more for me to cast very long distances. And that's where the Berkeley cane walker comes in handy. Next up, which is similar to that, we're going to talk about just a bigger walking bait. So this is the Reaction Innovations Vixen. You guys know this is one of my preferred topwater baits. The reason I like to go with a larger walking topwater bait is, again, because the bass are keying in on a little bit bigger bait fish. They're generally trying to eat a bigger shad, whether that's threadfin or gizzard. They're just trying to get a bigger meal. And if you live up north, the fish might be keying in on some Cisco that they're chasing to the surface. They might be keying in on perch or bluegill. The point is, generally, I like a little bit bigger of a profile, and that's for two reasons. One, it copies the size of the fish that they're after. But two, again, it's a bigger bait. I can still cast it a good distance. But I love to have a walking bait that I can cast long distances and cover a lot of water. So if you happen to be in the North Country, you're talking about a lot of your feeding flats, those flats that are going to be in 8 to 14 feet, a mixture of grass and rock and sand transitions. If you're fishing a river, you're going to be looking for your current seams that are either on the upstream or downstream islands. Maybe you got some secondary chutes that come in, or you got wing dams. And if you happen to live down south, you're talking about a lot of that shad migration starting to push back into creeks, where they get way in the back of the creek and they're on the shallow back end flats. Or you're just talking about your schooling activity, which could be out in the middle of the lake over 100 feet of water. In either case, a walking topwater like the Vixen does a great job of making all of that happen. Now, I will say, one of my favorite things to do is just cover a lot of shoreline. Now, because you've got a lot of bait fish that are moving into pockets, they're in transitions, the bass are in transitions too. So a lot of times you don't necessarily find them grouped up. On some lakes, yes, you'll have a ton of schooling activity going on, but on a lot of lakes, the fish seem to kind of get into small wolf packs, 1, 2, 3, 4 fish. They're roaming down the bank. They're just covering water. One day they'll be in one pocket, and the next day they'll be 2 miles down the bank just because they just kind of get on the bank and swim, and they're looking for an easy meal. Well, one of my favorite baits to just cover water is a Berkeley Chapo. So this is a plopper style bait, just a fantastic bait to cover water. It's one of those baits you kind of just cast, fire at the bank. You may, impart a little bit of irregularity on the retrieve, make the back prop sputter a little bit. But generally speaking, you're covering a ton of water. You're looking to get this in front of as many roaming fish as possible. Generally speaking, you're going to be looking at some of your rock transition type banks, points, channel swing banks. If you've got a grass lake in the North Country and you've got an inside grass line, that maybe is in 2 to 3 foot of water, that can be an absolutely dynamite thing. And if you happen to be fishing around isolated cover, it's a great bait where you can cast it out, stop it by the cover, plop it a few times, and then get it moving again. But the Berkeley Chapo is one of my absolute favorite baits. And I do want to point out color here. Generally speaking, I keep color really simple. I really like black. I think black, like this Maverick color, shines extremely well in the fall. I think if you're fishing schooling fish, your chrome colored baits are absolutely killer. And if you're fishing, you know, just any other roaming fish, any of your shad color baits like this guy, this is just like a sexy shad color, can perform very well. Now, if I am fishing for spotted bass or smallmouth, I do like to mix in something that's got a little bit of chartreuse on it. I do think that's a very good triggering color in the fall months. So we talked about the Chapo. I can't move on without saying that one of my favorite topwater baits in the fall is a buzz bait, and this guy is the Picasso Rusty Squeaker, one of my absolute favorites. You can see it's got the rusted out rivet on the back end. That does a great job at just helping the bait to get a bunch of squeaking sound to it. This is made, if you want it to clack the top of your bait so you can clack it. If you don't, I'll separate it there. You can hear it squeaking. I think the squeakier the better personally, and if you want to add a little bit more sound and thump and vibration, you can have it clip the top. But the Rusty Squeaker is an absolute killer of a buzzbait. And the thing is, a lot of people say, well, why would you throw a Chapo over a buzzbait or a buzzbait over a Chapo? And a lot of that comes down to the cover that I'm fishing. If I'm fishing around some grass, I prefer to throw the buzzbait because it'll come through it clean. The Chapo has a treble hooks and therefore will clip a lot of things. In the fall periods, a lot of times you run into like pine needles that are falling in the water or even potentially leaves. The buzzbait comes through that stuff a lot better generally than your treble hook Chapo. So I prefer it in that instance. The other is if I'm fishing around specific targets. So if I'm fishing around laydowns or I'm fishing, let's say skipping up under docks where I'm clipping the dock post, literally trying to hit the dock post, I would much rather do it with a buzzbait than I would with the Chapo. The Chapo will get stuck on that dock post as I come by. But they're very interchangeable baits. It really comes down to the structure that I'm fishing. And if I got a buzzbait, the Rusty Squeaker is definitely one that I've been having a ton of success on lately this year. The last one's a little bit of an outlier. So this guy, you've heard me talk about him here. This is the Jackal Pompadour, just a crawler style bait. I don't know what it is about the crawlers, but it seems like regardless of species, the crawler really doesn't kick into gear really well until late summer into the fall. It's one of those baits that, you know, I don't know if it's because it throws a bunch of water and looks quite different in the water versus some of these other baits. Where in the spring, you know, in the spring and early summer, it's just a little bit more intimidating to the fish. But in late fall, or not late summer into fall, the crawler style baits really start to shine. And again, I see this with bass, but I also see it with muskie. Crawlers are one of the best topwater baits for muskie. It seems like they don't really kick in until the hottest part of the summer and then into the fall. And I can't say specifically what it is, but if you're looking for a change of pace and you're looking to have more of what I consider target topwaters, meaning a topwater bait where you have specific targets that you're trying to fish, whether it's a dock, maybe it's a boulder, a laydown tree, something along those lines. There is something about a crawler like this Pompadour walking by them that just makes it hard for them to resist sometimes. It can trigger those fish that don't want a faster moving topwater bait to hit this, because this is a very slow moving topwater bait. To get it to work right, you're really just kind of walking it at its own little pace, and it's just more tantalizing. So I definitely will have this guy rigged up in the fall if I've got specific targets. You know, a lot of times if you're fishing around stumps, they can be really good. But it also tends to work really well on some of your post front or cold fronts that move through in the fall when the fish are really pulled up tight to some of those objects that are absorbing sunlight and producing a little bit warmer water temperatures around it. That thing does a really good job. I think it's just because it stays in the strike zone longer. But those are the 5. The fall topwater bait lineup right there. It's pretty simple. Definitely looking to cover a bunch more water. The fish are moving, the fish are chasing bait fish, and you want to mimic that and just make sure, you know, you keep your simples or your colors pretty simple as well. But I assure you guys, these are proven fish catchers that are working all around the country right now. So let me know in the comment section, what are some of your fall topwater baits so other viewers can learn from you guys as well. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.